If you wandered the Grote Markt in Bruges in 1450, you'd be stepping into the beating heart of Europe's cloth economy. Merchants haggled, weavers bargained, and dyers displayed samples that shimmered in the northern light. An entire rainbow laid out in wool and linen. Bruges, Ypres, Leiden, London. Each city pulsed with textile trade. But behind the grandeur of the cloth hall and the chatter of the markets lay the true crucible of color. Those narrow alleys where women tended boiling vats as if they were altars. The gilt statutes of Leiden, preserved today in the Staatsarchiv, read like chemistry manuals long before chemistry existed as a discipline. They outline the duties of dyers, the penalties for deceit, the standards for color fastness. In a world where textiles were wealth, dyed cloth needed to survive weather, sweat, washing, and time. Vibrancy meant credibility. Consistency meant commerce. And women, far from being excluded, were woven deeply into this technical world. Why women? Because dyeing relied on the same skills that defined much of women's domestic expertise: precision, patience, sensory acuity. A pot of madder didn't behave like Woad, and Weld didn't behave like anything except Weld. Each plant demanded its own rituals. A woman's ability to manage heat, moisture, timing, fermentation, and fiber wasn't just useful, it was indispensable. Some dyers were born into the craft. Others married into it. Widows often ran dye houses outright, sometimes with remarkable success. City tax rolls from Ghent, Bruges, and Norwich list female dyers owning property, paying apprentice fees, and operating in the same commercial arenas as their male peers. A few women even rented municipal dye kettles, massive communal equipment maintained by the city when private workshops couldn't support the cost. Their raw materials were part of Europe's economic bloodstream. Woad traveled north from Toulouse, a region so synonymous with the plant that entire villages depended on its cultivation. Madder root arrived from Zealand and Holland, where sandy soils coaxed intense pigment into the plant's red heart. Weld grew across Europe, but certain fields, chalky, well-drained, bathed in the right summer sun, produced flowers whose yellow outshone all others. To understand medieval color, we must forget our modern dyes squeezed from tubes or printed on polyester. These colors were alive, subtle, layered, sensitive to water quality, weather, the hands that crafted them. Woad blues shifted with oxygen. Weld yellows glowed differently under candlelight or sun. Madder reds deepened over days as the fiber mellowed. A masterpiece of dyeing was not a single act, but a dialogue between plant, fiber, water, and artisan. Inside the Dyehouse, every sense was working at once. Fermenting woad smelled earthy, sharp, unmistakable. Weld carried a faint sweetness. Madder gave off a damp, rooty aroma. The air, heavy with steam, blurred outlines and carried heat from dawn until dusk. Cloth darkened minute by minute as women dipped,
lifted, rinsed, and dipped again, each movement practiced, rhythmic, almost meditative. This sensory world existed within strict boundaries. The Guild of Lyon, one of Europe's most meticulous, regulated everything. The exact woods allowed for heating vats, the strength of alum solutions, the permissible substitutes, or more often, the forbidden ones. Even the minimum hours cloth must remain in specific baths. Such rules weren't mere bureaucracy. They were protection against fraud that could ruin a city's reputation.
Within this structure, women worked in roles both formal and informal. Few held the title of master, yet many managed daily operations, trained apprentices, and maintained recipes that families treated like sacred heirlooms. A widow could inherit her husband's workshop rights. A daughter might take charge of quality control, a position requiring a razor-sharp eye. Some women specialized in certain dyes, others in mordanting, others in finishing. Together, they formed the brains and bones of the operation. The archival trail reveal their success. Payment records show women receiving significant sums, especially for complex colors like deep woad blues or madder crimsons. In some districts, female dyers appear among the wealthiest taxpayers. Court cases document women defending stolen recipes, underpaid commissions, or unfair guild restrictions, and winning. Despite regional differences, a shared knowledge network ran through Europe's textile centers. Techniques migrated with workers and merchants. A woman in Leiden could adopt a new mordanting method pioneered in Ghent within a season. A Bruges dyer's innovation might reach London workshops within a year. Dyeing was one of Europe's first transnational industries, with women operating at its center. And behind the dazzling colors were three plants, Woad, Weld, and madder. Three pillars of a world ruled by chemistry, intuition, and experience. For every dyer, mastering these plants meant mastering an entire craft, and with it, the chance at prosperity, respect, and independence. As we step deeper into their world, these three dyes reveal the artistry, science, and skill that defined the Dyehouse women, a legacy more vibrant than any color they ever drew from a vat. Before synthetic dyes, before labs, before color charts, Europe knew three true pillars of color. Three plants shaped its textiles, its economies, even its social hierarchies. To the dyers who used them, especially the women who kept their secrets, these weren't just raw ingredients. They were companions, challenges, and sometimes miracles. Woad was the soul of Europe's blues, a leafy plant that at first glance looked like an unremarkable weed. But dyers knew better. Woad's magic lived in a transformation so dramatic it felt like alchemy. Fresh leaves were crushed, fermented, kneaded into balls and dried. The smell? Pungent enough to clear a street. The process? Hot, humid, precise. But once the vat came to life, frothy, yellow-green, almost alien, dyeing with woad became a kind of performance. Cloth dipped into the vat
didn't turn blue immediately. It emerged yellowish, almost sickly, and then oxygen hit it. The color deepened and darkened as if the cloth were breathing its way into the world. Woad women said had moods. Too hot, it sulked. Too cold, and it refused to work. A good dyer didn't just follow steps, she sensed when the vat felt right. For centuries, Woad blue clothed peasants, magistrates, merchants, and monks. Blue banners, blue gowns, blue linens drying on lines that stretched across Europe, all thanks to the stubborn little leaf. If Woad was moody, Weld was a saint, bright, consistent, obedient. Weld produced the clearest, sunniest yellow in the medieval world. When the plant bloomed, its tall, spiky flowers filled fields with a color so luminous the dyers could spot prime Weld from a distance. Women favored Weld because it behaved itself. It simmered gently in water, yielded its dye without drama, and clung to cloth with astonishing loyalty. But simplicity didn't mean dullness. Weld's brilliance was unmatched. Against Woad, Weld created greens so vivid they seemed almost modern. Weld was a color of joy, ceremony, and status. Bridal gowns, festival banners, and children's clothing often bore its bright signature. But it was also a sign of expertise. Only a skilled dyer could control the plant's heat sensitivity. Too hot, and Weld scorched into a muddy brown. Handled with care, though, it produced a yellow that could outshine gold leaf. Of the three great dyes, madder was the most temperamental and the most coveted. Its roots hid an entire palette: soft pinks, glowing corals, earthy terracottas, deep brick reds. No other European dye offered such range. Extracting good color from madder required intuition and finesse. The roots had to be aged, dried, crushed, and heated gently. Too gently, some complained. If Weld was a saint and Woad was a challenge, madder was a lover you had to learn how to handle. To build richer hues, dyers layered the dye in stages, coaxing depth out of the fiber. Some recipes called for the roots of 3-year-old plants only. Others required a mix of young and old. Many workshops guarded their madder techniques with a secrecy usually reserved for treasure. And for good reason. A perfect madder crimson could elevate a dyer's reputation for life. Together, Woad, Weld, and madder formed a complete spectrum, a trinity of living color. With them, dyers created everything from the softest pink to the deepest green to the richest violet. These plants shaped trade routes, guild rules, and entire regional identities. But most importantly, in the hands of the Dyehouse women, they became more than ingredients. They became tools of mastery, paths to independence, and the foundation of a craft that brought Europe to life in color.
If medieval dye houses were the engines of Europe's cloth industry, the guilds were their gatekeepers. Every color, every process, every ounce of material was monitored. Regulations stretched for pages. What temperature a Woad vat must reach, what woods could heat a Weld bath, even how many apprentices a master could train. But here's the hidden truth. Written rules held only half the knowledge. The rest lived in the memory and intuition of the women who actually kept the vats alive. Guild documents used strict language. No adulteration, no substitution, no private dyeing outside guild oversight. Violating these rules could mean fines, property seizures, even exile from the trade. Guilds feared fraud, but they also feared something else: the unregulated transmission of knowledge, especially when that knowledge ran through the hands of women. Dyeing wasn't like weaving, where looms filled entire halls. Dyeing happened in homes, courtyards, and small workshops, and women were everywhere in that space. Widows inherited workshops. Wives managed daily operations. Daughters learned the craft before they could write their names. Some women were formally recognized as professionals. Many more were unofficial experts, whose experience rivaled or exceeded that of guild masters. City account books tell the real story. Female dyers received payment for specialized skills, maintaining fermentation vats, preparing mordants, assessing fiber readiness, correcting botched batches. These were the most delicate tasks in the entire dyeing process, and they required a sensory awareness no guild test could measure.
A wood vat, for instance, needed constant attention. Too much oxygen ruined the entire batch. Too little heat, and the pigment never developed. Only experience taught a dyer to recognize the moment the vat turned, a shift in smell, a subtle change in froth, a tiny deepening of color near the edges. These cues couldn't be codified. They had to be felt. That's why the most valuable dyeing knowledge rarely appeared in guild statutes. It lived in family notebooks, little collections of secrets passed down through women. Some notes were simple: add ashes slowly. Others were cryptic: stir only until the steam changes. These books were guarded as fiercely as property deeds. Guild officials liked to imagine they controlled quality. In truth, they depended upon women's expertise to maintain it. A master might sign the certificate, but it was his wife, his sister, or his vat keeper who ensured the cloth actually passed inspection. And while guild rhetoric often minimized women's roles, commerce didn't. Merchants returned to the same workshops because the colors held fast. Travelers wrote about the dye wives of Bruges and Leiden, and apprenticeship contracts sometimes named women as primary instructors. Quiet acknowledgments of their skill. Guilds provided structure, but expertise? That belonged to the women who stirred the vats, read the fibers, and guarded the secrets of color. Their knowledge, part science, part intuition, kept Europe dressed in brilliance, and it endured not because it was written down, but because it was lived.
Dyeing wasn't just craft. It was commerce. Messy, competitive, unpredictable commerce. And for the women who ran dye houses, survival demanded as much business instinct as it did technical skill. Every color began with supply lines that stretched across Europe. Woad from Toulouse, madder from Zeeland, Weld from local fields, alum from distant mines. A single botched shipment could derail an entire season. Successful women dyers knew their suppliers as well as they knew their vats. Who harvested reliably, who cut corners, who delivered on time, who let dye plants sit too long in damp warehouses. Quality control was the first battlefield. Good roots meant bright reds. Fresh weld meant luminous yellows. And Woad was a gamble every time. Some women developed almost uncanny instincts, able to judge the future behavior of a vat by the smell of its fermented paste. Records show women dyers keeping books as detailed as any merchants. They tracked losses, timed purchases to market dips, and saved small reserves for emergencies. In an era without safety nets, financial discipline was survival. The cloth fairs were the great proving grounds. Merchants from cities miles away crowded the stalls, searching for the richest hues and the most trustworthy dyers. A perfect batch could bring a year of commissions. A failed one could spread ruin within a week.
Contracts were precise. Delivery deadlines, shade expectations, penalties for fading or bleeding. Some merchants paid in installments, tying dyers to long production cycles. Women balanced these obligations with local customers who walked in with smaller but steadier orders, an economic juggling act that required constant attention. Where money flowed, conflict followed. Lawsuits reveal a world of intense rivalry, formula theft, accusations of adulterated dyes, apprentices poached by rival workshops, even sabotage, spies slipping into workshops to learn a competitor's secret mordant. Competition also sparked innovation. Workshops developed signature colors, a blue deeper than anyone else's, a madder crimson with a warm glow, a green made by perfecting the timing between Woad and Weld. These were early brands. Customers crossed borders for them. Growth required organization. Successful dye houses weren't just creative, they were logistical powerhouses. Women coordinated workers, staggered vat schedules, and rotated tasks to keep colors consistent. If the blue vat was fermenting, the Weld bath simmered. If cloth was drying, mordanting for the next batch began. Some women turned that success into wealth. Tax records list female dyers owning property, running households with apprentices, even lending money. Dyeing could lift a family out of poverty, or with a little luck and a lot of discipline, into the ranks of respectable prosperity. But markets shifted constantly. Too much rain could ruin Weld harvests, drought could choke madder fields, politics could close trade routes overnight. Resilient dyers diversified, multiple suppliers, backup vats, seasonal strategies,
and secret recipes that kept customers coming even when rivals struggled. Commerce and competition shaped the dyehouse as surely as any plant or mordant. And the women who mastered both, they weren't just artisans, they were entrepreneurs in an age that barely had a word for such ambition.
The story of medieval women dyers didn't end in the Middle Ages. Their legacy flowed forward, sometimes openly, sometimes quietly, shaping everything that came after. The colors they created didn't just dye cloth, they dyed culture. Many of these tools survived, not because they were exotic, but because they were ordinary household objects. Passed down from mother to daughter, aunt to niece, they formed a material chain of knowledge, humble artifacts carrying generations of technique inside their scratches and stains. Written records were rare, but where they exist, they show evolution. Recipes grew more detailed, instructions became more standardized. What was once oral craft slowly turned into documented practice. The secrets of old guilds transformed into early manuals of chemistry, absorbing the influence of scientific curiosity. Then came the age of expansion. New dyes poured in, indigo from India, cochineal from the Americas, colors more intense and cheaper than European plants could rival. The old trinity of Woad, Weld, and madder faced challengers that rewrote the economic landscape. Many traditional dye houses struggled. Some vanished. Others adapted, learning new plants, experimenting with new mordants, and blending old techniques with imported materials. This resilience is part of the legacy, too. Survival through reinvention. The Industrial Revolution finished the transformation. Dyeing moved from small workshops to vast factories. Chemical dyes replaced plant-based pigments. Processes once guided by instinct, smell, color shift, bubble pattern were replaced by controlled formulas and mechanized precision. But even as industry grew, the human roots of the craft didn't disappear. Chemical pioneers built their breakthroughs on centuries of empirical dye knowledge. The intuition of medieval women, what temperatures produced stable color, how fibers responded to certain mordants, how long a vat stayed alive, became the foundation of modern textile science. Today, the old dyes are returning. Artists, historians, and eco-dyers are reclaiming the slow, tactile methods their medieval predecessors mastered. They plant woad in community gardens. They simmer madder roots in backyard workshops. They rediscover the feel of color emerging by hand, not from a formula, but from a living vat. And woven into this revival is acknowledgement. The women who died in the shadows of history, who kept recipes alive, who ran workshops, who navigated markets and guilds, are finally being recognized as innovators in their own right. Their legacy isn't just color, it's continuity, transformation, a reminder that craft, at its heart, is an unbroken conversation across time, where every maker adds a shade of their own to the tapestry.